Thank you everyone for joining us for today's session, a collaboration between the Public Sector Foresight Network and the Association of Professional Futurists entitled Updates on Foresight in the Canadian and US Governments. My name is Nicole and I am from the Association of Professional Futurists, a global community of futurists promoting foresight. We are very happy to collaborate with the Public Sector Foresight Network. And this is the second part of this series of conversations on public sector foresight. We'd like to emphasize that this collaboration helps us to promote foresight and share knowledge in cases, innovations in government. And we're very pleased and honored to have our special guests with us here today. But for now, if I may please invite everybody to turn on your video cameras for a very brief photo opportunity. We've got everybody's pictures in. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn this over now to Nancy Donovan from the Public Sector Foresight Network to start today's program. Over to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm co-founder of the Public Sector Foresight Network with Dr. Clem Bezold. Our purpose is to promote government foresight and its practice around the world. We are very happy to collaborate with the Association of Professional Futurists in co-hosting this event and really appreciate everyone's participation and those who have signed up to attend. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Bezold.
Hey, thank you, Nancy. I'm Clem Bezold and co-lead with Nancy of the Public Sector Foresight Network. The idea for today's session on updates in foresight in the Canadian and US governments emerged when I heard Imran Arshad's great presentation on Canadian foresight at the Dubai Futures Forum last October. Policy Horizons Canada is one of the leading national government foresight units globally, and they've created a Canadian Federal Foresight Network. We asked Imran, and he agreed to make today's presentation. So Imran Arshad is the Director of Outreach at Policy Horizons Canada, a federal foresight organization that helps the government of Canada develop future-oriented mindsets to strengthen decision-making. His role at Policy Horizons is to lead the teams that help build the foresight awareness and capacity of Canadian federal public servants so they can better understand uncertainty and disruptive change and the implications this may have for their work. He's led forward-looking policy studies on a range of issues, including next economy, emerging technologies, and the rise of Asia. That's the first speaker. We then thought and sought out someone who could give us an update on the federal government foresight in the US, and we're fortunate to have recruited Eric Popiel, a leader from the Office of Personnel Management and co-chair of the Federal Foresight Community of Interest. Eric served in the US Coast Guard as a pilot and instructor, and then moved to the Coast Guard's Foresight Unit, where he managed the famous Evergreen Project. He currently works at the US Office of Personnel Management as a Strategic Foresight Analyst and co-manager of OPM's Strategic Workforce Foresight Task Force, SWIFT. He's responsible for the Long-Term Futures Program that informs federal workforce policy for OPM and assists 24 federal agencies in their strategic human capital management. And he provides foresight guidance to several foresight agencies, in addition to being co-chair of the Federal Foresight Community of Interest. In terms of process for today, we will hear from Imran and then from Eric. During that time, we'll ask you to type questions into the chat space during each of the presentations, and we'll discuss those afterwards, recognizing that there may be questions we don't get to and don't have time in this hour-long session. The speakers have agreed to respond to remaining questions in writing after the session. The slides, recording of the session, and additional responses from the speakers will be posted shortly after that and shared. Imran.
Thanks, Clem. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm just maybe going to start sharing my slides here. It's wonderful to see so many people from across the world here today. In Canada, it's customary to begin presentations like this one with a land acknowledgement that commemorate Indigenous people's kinship to the land. It's a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial. So before we start, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which I live, work, and play. I'm joining you from Ottawa, Canada, which is on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Once again, thanks so much for this opportunity to be here. Big thanks to the Public Sector Foresight Network and the Association of Professional Futurists for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. I'm going to be talking a little bit about policy horizons and the work we do, and then we'll expand on some of the work that we're doing through some detailed examples. So Policy Horizons Canada, we are a foresight organization within the Federal Public Service of Canada, and our job is to help colleagues in the government better understand disruptive changes, help them explore the challenges and opportunities that may result from these, and so that they can consider these when they make their decisions and develop policies and strategies and when they're designing programs. Our main purpose, quite frankly, is to challenge people's assumptions about the future. We originally started as a think tank about 25 years ago, and back then our main purpose was to carry out medium-term horizontal research projects with various federal departments and agencies. And then about 12 years ago, we shifted from a traditional think tank to a foresight organization and became Policy Horizons Canada. And the main reason for that shift was to be able to incorporate more longer-term thinking into decision-making and to help build the foresight muscle within the Canadian Federal Public Service. We have a mandate that's government-wide. We're governed by a steering committee of deputy ministers from a range of portfolios across the Federal Public Service. Deputy ministers in Canada are the heads of the departments and ministries at the administrative level. Our main audience is the Canadian Federal Public Service. There are over 150 organizations and over 300,000 public servants in the government of Canada. At Policy Horizons, we are around 45, so quite small in comparison to 300,000 public servants, but actually quite large in compared to other foresight organizations in governments in other countries. So we're very fortunate in that regard. So in carrying out our work, we focus mainly on three areas. We conduct foresight research. We partner with departments and agencies across the federal government to help them incorporate foresight into their work. And we help build the foresight capacity and awareness of federal public servants so they can understand what it is and how it can be used. So regarding our foresight research, what we do is we look for shifts occurring in a range of areas, including the economy, society, governance, and other areas that could have wide-ranging implications for policy, areas that cut across the mandates of a range of departments, and areas that might disrupt whole policy or regulatory regimes. So we carry out foresight studies on these particular topics. Practically speaking, what we do is we produce foresight reports, we publish them on our website, we present and facilitate conversations on them with our government colleagues on this work. So that's some of the work that we do. In terms of some of the topics that we're working on this slide, you'll see the studies to the left are some that we've done over the past few years. And the ones on the right are the 4 foresight research projects that we are currently working on. We have a project going on the future of sense making, which examines how things like artificial intelligence, the metaverse, mis and disinformation, and the declining trust in traditional authorities and institutions are transforming how we experience and make sense of the world. We have another project on the future of value that analyzes the economic transitions based on human activities and how different emerging technologies are disrupting these work activities and business processes. Our work on biodigital convergence explores how biological and digital systems are coming together in new and interesting ways, and the implications of this on various sectors within the economy, including health, food, the environment, security, and manufacturing. And we have our work on future lives, which examines how the typical life course is changing in Canada. You'll be able to find these foresight reports on our website, so please do, and also please do reach out to us if you want to learn more. Our main objective in conducting these foresight studies is to help our fellow public servants and leaders understand the potential disruptive changes taking place so they can take them into account in their decision-making. At Policy Horizons, we also partner directly with departments and agencies across government to identify and explore disruption in their specific areas of work and to help them better understand the potential futures that may arise or that they may face so they can use that knowledge to improve the decisions that they're taking today. We have ongoing collaborations with the Privy Council Office, which is the central coordinating agency on policy across the federal public service. And the Privy Council Office really encourages departments to think about future-oriented policy ideas and options, and often engage Policy Horizons in that work. Along with those ongoing collaborations, we develop partnerships with specific government departments and agencies to help them incorporate foresight in their work. Some recent examples of partnerships are included here in this slide, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail later. But we do work with a wide range of departments in a number of fields, including in the areas of intelligence, immigration, health, global affairs, and many others. So before foresight can effectively be practiced and used in government, it needs to be better understood. And that's one of our jobs as well. It needs to be understood in terms of what it is and how it can add value to government work. So a big part of our work at Policy Horizons is to build the awareness and capacity of analysts and leaders to understand and use foresight in their work. And we do this in many ways. For example, we host a federal foresight network that includes most major federal government departments and agencies, where members have an opportunity to share their foresight experiences. We provide foresight training and conduct scanning sessions, which are open to any public servant. We host events such as Horizons Talk sessions, where we invite experts to share their work on future-oriented issues with our colleagues throughout the federal public service. And we have Futures Week, which is our annual event where we bring together subject matter experts and people that are practicing foresight and policy practitioners from around the world for 3 days of presentations and conversations on future-oriented topics. We also build awareness of our foresight through our communications activities, through the publication of our reports and videos on our website, and the promotion of our work through social media, as well as a regular newsletter. So I encourage you to check out our website and follow us on social media to get a better understanding of the work that we do, as well as to participate in our upcoming Futures Week this spring. We'll be highlighting some key disruptions on the horizon at that event, and we'd really be happy if you were able to join us. So these are some of the activities that we do to build foresight capacity of public servants. And I'm really happy to say that the awareness of foresight and the capacity to practice foresight has increased over the past few years. There's a growing number of areas within the government of Canada that have staff or units dedicated to foresight, which is evidence of the growing interest and demand within our system. And I'll be elaborating on that a little bit more as well. I have a few detailed examples of our work that I'll speak to now. The first is a more in-depth look at one of our current areas of research, Future Lives. Then I'll speak to partnerships we've done with departments within the Government of Canada, as well as highlight the work of recently established foresight teams in federal organizations. And then I'll provide a little bit more detail on the work we do hosting the Federal Foresight Network. So in terms of Future Lives, about 1.5 years ago, we started to undertake a foresight study on the future of life course transitions. We felt it was important to explore changes occurring in how people in Canada engage with life activities, such as forming households, bearing children, going to post-secondary education, entering and leaving the workforce, and so on. We thought that conducting foresight on this could be highly useful in a government context, as these are all activities where public policy has a role to play. So over the years, society has broadly defined a certain kind of life course as the norm in Canada. We're born, we attend school, we start work, we leave home, we may get married, we retire, and so on. Many policies are organized around that assumption of people following the standard life course. However, shifts in various domains are transforming our life courses, and the standard life course may not reflect a future life course for a growing number of people. So our Future of Lives work provides an initial framework to explore the changes in society that might transform how people in Canada live their lives. I think this framework helps us make sense of how the changes we see today might influence what people know, what they believe about the future, or what they value in life. And as a part of this framework, our research team identified life course components and the forces of change that are affecting these components. You'll see those forces of change just on the outer rim of the orange circle. So as we think about changes to how people live, there are 6 areas of life that stand out, and those are indicated in the orange hexagons. Care, education, living arrangements, reproduction, labor, and a period of older adulthood. Experiences in these 6 areas structure the life course for most people in Canada and take a lot of people's time, financial resources, and effort. They often involve one or more key decision points, life events or transitions, and they form the basis for policies that shape how people live their lives. Government support or lack of support for a particular activity could send people in a particular direction and on a particular life course, causing a series of consequences in the future for that particular individual or for society in general. So far, our Future Lives research team has identified 9 forces of change that may be affecting the sequence and nature of the 6 life course areas. Due to time, I won't go into all these, but can give you an example of one. So for example, regarding social norms surrounding families, those are changing. And norms surrounding sexual orientation, gender, and relationships are rapidly evolving. There's new kinds of relationships, such as donor-sibling relationships or different childcare or custodial relationships that are blurring traditional distinctions between friends and family. So all these could have potential implications for policies moving forward. So in general, to summarize, the purpose of our Future Lives and for that matter, the rest of our foresight studies are really to consider and challenge assumptions that are present in government policies and society, and to help people better understand the uncertainty and disruptive changes so they can take these into consideration when they make decisions, develop policies, and design programs. Another thing we do at Policy Horizons is we partner with departments and agencies on foresight projects, particularly in program or policy areas that are facing a lot of disruption. So how does this work? Well, in a recent partnership, we worked with Public Services and Procurement Canada over 6 months to examine the future of people management. The focus of this work was to inform a 3-year human resources strategic plan. In all our partnerships, we focus not only on exploring how the future may unfold and the opportunities and challenges for that particular domain, but also on building the capacity of our partners to integrate foresight into their work on an ongoing basis. So in this particular partnership, Public Services and Procurement Canada were the main researchers. They were they had access to the subject matter experts and authors, while Policy Horizons, we provided the foresight expertise, and we provided support in terms of workshop design, in terms of facilitation, and in terms of advising them on different foresight tools and methods. The project involved interviews and also regular meetings and workshops, including those with senior management of public services and procurement. And this work resulted in important insights around how government human resources will need to adapt to the changing labor market, including changing hiring practices, career paths, and upskilling workers. It also helped to reveal planning assumptions that were vulnerable to disruption and helped identify some strategic priorities for the department. One output of the work included a set of 5 core change drivers disrupting the domain of people management. These included automated decision-making enabled by artificial intelligence. Next was organizations being forced to adapt and rapidly respond to emerging issues as a result of the accelerated pace of change and uncertainty. Career customization was another one, as employees increasingly want control over their professional destinies to ensure their values, priorities, and lifestyles are compatible with their work. Flexible and inclusive hiring, since remote work and technological advancements are enabling access to a broader talent base in a much more competitive labor market. And finally, a growing skills gap, which highlights the requirement of new workforce skills and capabilities as organizations evolve to meet the demands of the ever-changing business landscape. So exploring these disruptors provided Public Services and Procurement Canada with an opportunity to think through how these changes could influence their particular work. Policy Horizons also partnered with teams working on social innovation and social finance at Employment and Social Development Canada. COVID-19 had really disrupted the social economy, impacting not only how organizations in the social economy do their work, but also their revenue streams. And the pandemic really revealed how critical the sector is to Canada, but also how vulnerable it is to disruption. So over the span of about 7 months or so, with the support of Policy Horizons, the team at Employment and Social Development Canada examined the changes within the social economy and their implications for the social economy ecosystem. The purpose of this partnership was to use foresight to inform decision-making and strategy in relation to social innovation and social finance, and to build the capacity of our partners to incorporate foresight into their work. So similar to the partnership with public services and procurement, and to many of the partnerships we do, we try to help organizations gain insight and to help them build their awareness and capacity of foresight. To give you a sense of some of the results of this foresight project, the team identified 5 drivers of change, which include compounding sources of distress and insecurity, which are disrupting the design, demand, and delivery of social services, polarizing mindsets that are challenging the values that underpin the social economy in Canada, pressure to scale, which refers to the pressures that the social economy faces to scale in order to respond to ever-growing and evolving needs, the rise of decentralized systems of community power, where we see communities tailoring solutions to their context and goals to meet new population needs, and the influence of Indigenous worldviews that might influence values, challenge the current economic model, and bring forward new perspectives, potentially impacting how services are designed and delivered by the social economy and governments. So while we partner with departments to help incorporate foresight in their work, there are also foresight units and teams within a number of foresight organizations. Over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, there has been an ebb and flow of these foresight units and teams across the Canadian public service. But what we've seen in the last years is, especially after the pandemic, we've seen an increased interest in foresight in the government of Canada, and a number of foresight units and teams have been established in various departments and agencies. And while we have over the past had foresight units in departments such as national defense for a number of years, as do many other countries that practice foresight, it's encouraging to see foresight teams being established in areas that are not necessarily security and defense related. So in recent years, we've seen foresight units or teams established in the Canada Revenue Agency, Health Canada, the Department of Justice, the International Development Research Centre, and the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So to give you a sense of these, I'll highlight the foresight unit in the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Over the years, it's grown as policy team, but realized that they didn't have the capacity for as much proactive policy advising as they'd like. So in the fall of 2021, they established a policy foresight team, which has leaned on policy horizons to gain insight did. The intention behind the establishment of the foresight policy foresight team was to enhance the corporation's preparedness to act in a changing environment, to enable transformational policy advice, and to lead Canada's effort to build a more balanced and fair housing system for all Canadians. Currently, the team at Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation both leads and supports initiatives involving foresight. They have 3 priority initiatives, which are housing finance, climate change, and housing, and identifying and assessing the impact of global megatrends on the housing system. And in addition to these foresight initiatives, the policy foresight team also supports various teams across the organization to help them incorporate foresight into their work. Many of these foresight units and teams within departments have strong capacity to do foresight in their own right, but they also come to policy horizons when needed for advice on how to run foresight processes, to learn more about foresight methods and tools, and to gain some insight on foresight subject matter content. And as a center of expertise in foresight within the Canadian government, we're really happy to support these foresight groups and to see the growth of foresight and the establishments of these teams in the Canadian government ecosystem.
Hello, Imran, your 2-minute warning is here.
All right, great, thank you. Which brings me to my last example. So good timing. I would like to discuss the work of the Policy Horizons does in terms of the Federal Foresight Network. Federal Foresight Network is open to Canadian federal public servants. It focuses on building the foresight capacity among public servants. It hosts monthly workshops. We host talks. We showcase the foresight work of members and others, and we organize activities for our members to establish and help grow their foresight practice. The network meets monthly. In addition to the monthly session, the network hosts a monthly open door tutor hour where members are invited to bring questions, comments, and new tools or techniques that they would like to share with other members. The network started in 2019 with around 20 to 30 people interested in or practicing foresight. At that time, we had met in person, and when COVID broke out, the network was forced online, which actually allowed us to expand our base to over 700 members today. Now an average of 80 members attend our monthly sessions. This is a small sample of the types of sessions that the Federal Foresight Network hosts. We have workshops on foresight tools or techniques. We recently had one on scanning. We've held others on domain mapping, different foresight methods like Three Horizons and many others. We host presentations at the network. Last month, we hosted the New Zealand's Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment, where they explained how they're using foresight to produce insight briefings. And we also recently hosted a showcase of graduate student theses where graduate students from the Masters of Strategic Foresight program at the Ontario College of Art and Design University were invited to present their capstone research projects. Well, that's it for me. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. I hope I have provided some useful information about Policy Horizons and our work and our collaborations within the Canadian government context. It's really an exciting time for us at Policy Horizons and for foresight in general in Canada. And we're really happy to be supporting the use and growth of foresight in the Canadian government. I look forward to Eric's presentation and participating on our conversation that follows. Back to you, Clem.
Okay. Thank you, Imran. Well done, and thank you all who are entering questions. Keep doing that as we now shift to Eric.
Let me get my presentation shared here, and I will get started. Can everybody see that? That's good. All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about foresight in the U.S. government, give you an overview of some foresight activities in certain agencies. I got 7 agency examples and then 1 FFRDC, which is a federally funded research and development corporation. Then I'm going to go through a quick case study and then kind of give you sort of a broad overview of the growth of foresight in the government. Unlike, I think, Canada, it's quite nascent. I think we are definitely growing. Since I've been involved with foresight in the U.S. government for roughly 10 years, it has made leaps and bounds, but we're not quite there yet. I was hired over at the Office of Personnel Management to build the foresight capacity and capability over here at OPM, and then across the federal government as well. I'm an army of one with no budget, and I just was able to hire 1 more person. So if you look at the about 2.5 million federal employees in the U.S. government, we have about 2 people that are tasked with sort of spreading this around government. The good news is that the reception has been very warm. And so as you're going to see in these next couple of slides, there's a lot of growth in this area. We have a lot of work to do, and we're by no means at the end, but there's a ton of growth to do as well. But I'm very encouraged, and I hope that, whenever I choose to leave government, we'll be able to pass on this legacy of building this, and it'll be much further along than when I started. Before I get started, I love this quote from Kat Tully. I'm only going to keep it up here. I think probably most of you have read this one. Really, I love the fact that foresight, and this is what I try and drive home to the agencies that I assist and help, is that we're trying to design these long-term solutions to ensure that no one is left behind. Yes, we like to build resilience and mitigate risks, and we love talking about technology and AI and all this other stuff, but really what we're trying to do is ensure that the decisions we make today are going to improve people's lives, and we're really going to move forward with everybody, and so we don't leave groups of people behind. So with that, I'm going to go into a quick overview of what certain agencies are doing. I'll start with NIOSH, which is the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health. These slides are going to be posted. I'm not going to read everything, but what they've really done is they've really begun to institutionalize this. They began looking at foresight and developing a framework to understand how researchers and practitioners can practice this. They've done several different projects, and they continue to build on the work that they have been doing as well. They are really trying to look at using foresight and then making sure, because there are a lot of scientists and doctors over there, to make sure that they're peer reviewing this stuff to really summarize their projects. When you go to some of their presentations, they are very rigorous when it comes to their research and their analysis. So I love what they've done and taken foresight to kind of a level where they're really looking at the research, looking at the trends and the drivers, and really making sure that people understand exactly what they're doing. They are growing their network, they're growing their footprint, and they're really doing it in exponentially over there. The next one is the CDC. I think this is a huge one. They have really come a long way. They went down to the University of Houston, which is primarily the framework that we use to do foresight across government. They have trained over 80 people across multiple responsibility levels. They've trained a lot of people in horizon scanning. They continue to do that. They continue to enable the experience and continue to bring people in across the agency to actually do foresight projects. They really are focused on solving problems, driving strategy, and transferring these to promising practices and then spreading that out, right? They've developed what's called the Strategic Foresight Learning and Action Network. They bring people together on a fairly regular basis to have conversations about foresight and really expand this reach. So, as people are continuing to build sort of these networks, they've done that as well too, and they continue to grow their capacity. The Government Accountability Office has also done a lot of work in foresight. They have a Center for Strategic Foresight. It is a hub for identifying, monitoring, and analyzing emerging issues. This gets presented to policymakers, specifically Congress. GAO is not an executive agency. They are a legislative agency, and they do a lot of work in this area. So they're really focused on the policymakers, and they're really looking at the different trends. They have published a trends report. There's a link there that will be in the slides as well, that will affect, of the trends that will affect government society in the next 5 to 15 years that people are using. I know I pull from it. And they continue to provide that relevant information to Congress. They also use foresight to develop their strategic plan. And so they're one of the foundational agencies in government that says, hey, we can take this foresight, we can gather these great insights out of it, and we can actually convert it into a strategic plan, which I think is fantastic. The next agency I want to do a quick highlight on is the EPA. They have been doing foresight a little bit longer than most. They started kind of back in 2016. And if you actually go back further in this agency, they've been doing it for a lot longer, but it's kind of gone in ebbs and flows. But this is what they wanted to sort of highlight. They had the Lookout Panel project. They did a 2018, they did a federal benchmarking project, which was a peer-reviewed report that went around and interviewed a lot of different people in the US government about which foresight activities they were doing. And then they've begun to do some significant horizon scanning for their strategic planning. They're really trying to increase the EPA's ability to prepare for those future threats and take advantage of the emerging opportunities. And the good news is that they have, along with a lot of other agencies, they've been funded well. And so we're able to do some of this stuff and really apply it when it comes to strategic planning for the agencies. In terms of their future plans, they are really making recommendations to the leadership of EPA. They are regularly convening these panels. They're bringing this to the attention of the decision makers, the senior decision makers in government. And so while it's not completely 100% out there just yet, as is with all these agencies, what's really encouraging, as I mentioned before, is that when these methodologies are being applied, when people are doing these horizon scans, the outputs are actually being briefed to the levels to high levels in the agency, and action is being taken. The next one is the Secret Service. They have been doing scenario-based planning and a lot of foresight work for quite some time. They also have been partnering with U.S. Army Cyber Institute and the University of Arizona on a process called threat casting, and these reports that are coming out are informing the agency leadership about the changes in the threat environment, specific to the Secret Service investigative mission over the next 10 years. They're producing some trend cards that are able to be distributed across the government and across the agency as well. And they continue to, again, build this capacity and this capability. And again, as I mentioned, take the insights coming out of this and begin to inform the senior level leaders of their agency and also their strategic plan as well. The Peace Corps is another agency that has come on board and said, hey, this is something that we would really like to develop because we understand that our mission is going to significantly change. I like to use the Peace Corps as an example. When I was talking to them initially, we were talking about sort of the green economy and sort of switching off of fossil fuels and the oil economy. And what was interesting is as we were kind of looking at the future, they mentioned, hey, that's kind of interesting, but what does the green economy have to do to us? And we started having this conversation, and they recognized that a lot of their missions and a lot of their people are in areas of the world that are funded by oil. And they realize that as the world transitions to a green economy, their mission is going to significantly change. And it was almost like I saw a light bulb go off that said, wow, we have to think about issues that we may not have thought were impacting us, but that we, if you look at the second and third order effects, are really going to provide some insights about how our mission is going to change in the future. So they have begun, I believe, over just the last year or two, to pilot the process, to develop some recommendations, and to really try and use that framework, the University of Houston framework, to certify some of their professionals as well too. And so they're working on strengthening their foresight cohort, expanding and improving their engagement, and then really focusing their scanning activities as well too. But I like to use them as a really interesting example of kind of the light bulb going off. And I'm seeing this more and more across the government as you begin to talk to people about foresight methodologies. They begin to see how this can help them and how this can really drive their decision-making process as well. I'll highlight my agency. I work for OPM. We have done several things over the past year. We have released a foresight guidebook, and I will provide the links to that in the follow-up Q&A as well to Nancy and Clem, who can post it along with the slides. What we did was we took the Houston Foresight Framework and really tried to put it in a very high-level overview. That was something that agencies could look, get an idea of what foresight was, and then begin to sort of implement it. And our goal is to take each one of those modules and provide not only training, but additional insight and guidance into the foresight framework, so that agencies can get some training and then can begin to do this on their own. There's two of us working over here at OPM. We can't cover everything, but what we are trying to do is sort of train the trainers. We have done some very successful projects with the Chief Financial Officers Council, the OPM Office of Inspector General, and the Federal Executive Boards. And they are really were informative when it came to their strategic planning as well too. The CFO work actually won an award with ATARC for being innovative in it when it comes to workforce planning. We have hired some additional people. And what we're trying to do is really build out the foresight team and the future of the workforce over there, and really try and get this ingrained in the culture of OPM. So we're trying to expand our capacity and our capabilities over there. The final thing I would like to, and my last thing, I would be remiss if I did this. Like, we do use the Houston framework, which was Andy Hines and Peter Bishop. We worked with them in conjunction to sort of develop that guidebook. And we are hugely appreciative. And I love when I talk to Andy about it. He mentioned, he's like, this is exactly what we want our framework to do, to get out there, to be out there in the world so people can use it and be aware of it as well. Finally, I do want to highlight one thing. It's the Aerospace Corporation. This is a nonprofit, but it's also a federally funded research and development center. They've done some highly collaborative work when it comes to foresight in terms of more on the policy aspect of it. They've also done some very interesting things when it comes to the space enterprise. That's where they kind of live and breathe. And they are really building a nice capacity over there to really think about, what does the future of space look like? What is the future, what is kind of leaving this planet and going out into the solar system and beyond look like? And that's sort of their niche, but they're using foresight to really apply that. And they're also designing different collaboration projects as well. So that's a really quick overview of just some select agencies that are actually doing foresight and applying it and practicing it. I will close this part of the presentation by saying that a lot of this is it's nascent, right? And so we're talking about agencies that may not necessarily understand what foresight is, but they're really trying to. And so we're starting at the ground floor here. So as opposed to maybe some of these other projects that are a little bit more in depth, what we're really trying to do is get people to buy into the concept, and then we're going to keep building the capacity and the capability of them to do it and really train the trainers. So I want to do in my last about 7 minutes that I've got is go through a really quick project that I recently wrapped up. It started pre-COVID. We kind of ran it all the way through COVID. Myself and a team from the Chief Financial Officers Council worked on doing some foresight and to inform their strategic planning process. and inform what they were going to do for their financial management workforce. In the context of all of this, obviously we had COVID, we had the CARES Act, and we switched from an in-person to a fully virtual environment. But it was actually really good. We got a lot of buy-in from all the 24 CFO Act agencies and the CFOs. We're also able to get a lot of volunteers from their staffs to participate in the project. And as I mentioned before, I would argue it was, kind of elementary level foresight, but what we got was people excited about it, wanting to participate, and with a commitment that when we reboot this in 2024, 2025 and redo it, they're all on board with this, and we expect to have a whole lot more participation as well too. That was the context. We did a lot of scanning. As we did our horizon scanning with these volunteers, we saw that data, or they chose that data and technology would be the two biggest forces really impacting the future of the financial management workforce. And so that's what they wanted to focus on as we built and designed some scenarios. We did some data analysis, right? So we did some horizon scanning, but we also worked with the National Science Foundation and some programmers over here at OPM, and we did some concept and some word mining when we inputted all of these different documents that we were reading as well in the computer. And what ended up coming out with in some different activities that we were doing and using some different software was technology and data were huge when it came to the literature around the financial management workforce. I don't want to say that this was the be all end all. I think there was a nice way to sort of support what we were reading and the horizon scanning that we were doing, but it was very interesting, and we plan on sort of tweaking this and refining this when we go back into doing the horizon scan in the next couple of years. We also built out some drivers and uncertainties when it came out to data and tech. And the two uncertainties that we used were, and remember, we have to think about across government, was leader or laggard in data gathering, usage, analytics, and also implementing and adopting technology across the federal enterprise. When you think about one or two agencies, right, you can sit there and say, well, they have a lot of leeway and a lot of, they can control what they do. When you look across the government enterprise, when we talk to the CFOs, they're like, we really don't have a lot of control when it comes to a little bit of uniformity and really making sure that data and technology were used and applied equally and uniformly across the enterprise. So these are ones that we used. We designed 4 different scenarios. These are their summaries here. We used a quick 2x2 matrix to do this. There is a much longer scenario document that I'm more than happy to send out. It's all in the public domain. And these were some of the summaries of the scenarios that we used. This is where our insights were being drawn from. So we used the volunteers to not only construct these scenarios, and then we switched them into a different scenario so they would look at the implications of those scenarios and answer that question. So what does it mean for the financial management workforce? The outputs of that were 7 strategic goals that the financial management workforce and the chief financial officers wanted to focus on over the next 10 years. And we put these into an implementation plan, but you can see them on the left side when it came to data, using data to strategically make decisions. We really had to make sure that we were supporting our current workforce, but also recruiting that future workforce. Technology was a huge one that needed to be harnessed in a way that it wasn't sort of anecdotal across the government. Succession planning was huge. That's a big problem in government, but they recognize this is something that we have to start working on now. I was very pleased to see that culture change, the whole idea of financial management, accountants and budgeteers and stuff facilitating that culture change, and then really building those lasting partnerships across the agencies, but not only there, but also into private sector, public sector, the state governments, the local governments. How are they going to actually do that? So this is what the insights kind of drove them to. And then we built out, we also asked them to identify some future skills because we were looking at the financial management workforce, and we wanted to make sure that as they were recruiting the people to come into government that were going to have these longer careers, that we were also looking for the people that the skill sets that would not only benefit the financial management workforce today, but also in the future. And so we asked for them to go out and say, hey, in your scenario, what are some of the skill sets that you might need to be a successful financial management professional? What we ended up doing was collecting these, taking them back over to the Office of Personnel Management, and they went through a rigorous process to validate them. And so there was a list of 10 skills for the future that we ended up coming out that OPM validated. Says, hey, if you're going to hire some people, you should look for these skill sets. You should also train your current workforce in some of the skill sets. So the ones that are underlined there are some of the ones that have come out and sort of we're looking, we're common across the different scenarios. That
Eric, your 2-minute warnings here.
2 minutes. Thanks, Clem. That all turned into a plan that is published on the CFO website. This is the front page of it. Again, I will send you out the links to all of this to make sure that you can read it if you want in depth. And if you want the scenarios, you're more than welcome to. And so that's what kind of came out of this whole plan. And then the CFOs decided, hey, now we actually don't want to just look at a plan that's all shiny. We actually want to go and implement it. And so what they started doing was, how are we going to implement this plan? We created a workforce, or OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, created a workforce modernization working group that is now an executive steering committee. The project scope began to grow. People began to say, hey, now this is funded and it's also promoted by the Office of Personnel Management, OMB. We should be on board. So that got driving a lot of people to it. We started working on some different training things to begin to implement what we were doing. So this data analytics training came out, and it started to, we began to train not only people in the workforce, but also executives, so they would understand what data analytics were, visualization, all that sort of stuff. And again, if you want a little bit more information, I'm running out of time here, but I can certainly reflect on this as well with you as well. And in addition to that, we're developing a career planning and training tool, which is going to be a very streamlined way for financial management professionals across the federal enterprise to not only gather the training that they need and take it for their career path, but also for future skill sets. And also it'll chart their course for the future and say, in order to do this, these are some of the things that you should probably take. And finally, I throw this slide up there. This is just a real quick snapshot of foresight in government, of all the different agencies that are working on things. Again, it is nascent. It still needs to be nurtured, and we're growing. And I'm an optimist, and so I'm looking at this and I'm saying we're not there yet. Lots of work to get done, but hey, it's certainly better than it was 5-10 years ago. That is my contact information: LinkedIn, my Gmail account, my OPM account. Feel free to email me with any questions, comments, or concerns, and I'm more than happy to engage with you at any time. So I'll turn it back over to Clem. I think my time is up.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for speaking at the speed at which you flew your jets.
Appreciate it.
And now I'll turn it over to Nancy to moderate the questions. But Nancy, I did neglect to suggest to people the email for adding, making suggestions to us going forward, to the Public Sector Foresight Network, for future topics. If you'd want to add that as you move to the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Clem. This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much, Imran and Eric. There were several questions in the chat, which was really substantive and very meaningful in terms of the issues raised and addressed, but I'm going to address several questions that various people raised and combine those issues. Evaluation has always been a perennial issue. How do you evaluate foresight? And there were different facets of this that were raised. So Eric and Imran, whatever you would like to address. The omnibus question relates to: how have you developed tools to evaluate impact of work on public policies once reports are published? Another facet of this question relates to defining and how to evaluate foresight capacity. And finally, how is foresight training evaluated and assessed? And with a sub-issue there of the value of custom-built foresight training for a particular agency versus general foresight training, sort of off-the-shelf for agencies. So whoever would like to go first, and whatever dimension of the evaluative question you would like to address.
So Nancy, I can go quickly on this one. I think when it comes to evaluation of foresight, I think the way that I'm trying to do it is to say, you know, as we go into an agency to help them build out a strategic plan or a plan for the future, one of the things that I obviously consider success is A, is a plan produced, and B, are they actually using it, which I think is the more important part. And are they infusing that into sort of their daily activities and their agency mission. And so what I have told some of these folks that I've worked with on these projects is you have to constantly go back and reference, you know, your plan, where do you want to be, what do you want to accomplish, and are you actually taking steps to make that and to get to where you want to be. So for me, you know, if it's working, there's two steps. One is, are you getting to where you want to be? And the second part is, are you constantly performing those horizon scans on a regular basis to ensure that you're aware of what is coming down the pike? And are you adjusting early your plan? Are you making those adjustments to the budget, to your activities before you just are in reactive mode? So I have challenged, and I don't have a lot of data on this because honestly, the 3 projects that we finished have only been consummated in the last couple of years. But what I'm really interested in going back in a couple of years is going back to these different ones that we've worked on and saying, what did you do? How effective was it? For example, with the CFOs, how many people did you train? You know, on what skills did you train? Were you able to get them prepared for the future? So I am more of when it comes to evaluation, it's more of an action-oriented thing. But I've tried to drive the point home of that horizon scanning is critical to ensuring that you are aware of what's coming and that you are anticipating it rather than reacting to it. So that's how I'm going to sort of evaluate and measure. Imran?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I totally agree with what you have said. And thanks for the question. It's a good one and one that we get, I think, a lot. How do we evaluate either our foresight research or the capacity? In terms of our foresight research, I think that's quite difficult to do, just because policies and programs are designed based on a range of different inputs. And so the foresight may be one of those inputs, but not necessarily all of them. So that's where I feel the difficulty is in terms of evaluating a straight line as to whether this particular report had an impact on this particular policy. I think we're in the job of trying to get leaders to think about the changes that are taking shape and then incorporate that into their mental models and their thinking through conversations and things like that, so they can, when it comes down to making decisions on policy, they have that in their minds. So a difficult thing to do, but something that, like, for example, in a couple of years ago, we were asked to design a couple of scenarios on the future of work by a senior management committee. We did that, and they were able to stress test some of their policies against those scenarios, and they found that some of those policies did not hold, and they would need to be redesigned. So that can show you sort of a direct impact on what on foresight in terms of the particular scenarios. But generally speaking, our reports, they inform a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, and a lot of decision making, but it's hard to draw a direct line. In terms of foresight capacity, we have been doing these partnerships for a couple of years now, and sometimes it takes time, to be able to show an impact. We have gone back to a couple of them to get a sense of, how is it working? Have you been able to incorporate foresight in other things other than the foresight partnership that we particularly took on? So we have done that with a couple departments, but we need to do that more with some of our other partnerships. So one example of us doing that is with the Canada Revenue Agency, which we worked with a couple of years ago. They have established a foresight unit. That in itself, and I think this was perhaps mentioned in the chat as well, that in itself shows that it has had an impact because they have dedicated foresight resources to in that particular agency. In terms of foresight training, I think it's something that we do through surveys. to see how, and this is largely the introduction to foresight sort of training, to see how people have what they've learned and how and ways to improve the training. But in terms of how they use the training, that's something I think we need to work on a little bit more. We have developed a strategic plan over the past few months that hopes to address like some of these things in terms of evaluation, so we can get a better sense of how foresight is being used in the federal public service in Canada, as well as how the impact that it's having. And we need to, I think one of the questions was, are there some sort of metrics that we've developed for this? That's something that we're in the process of thinking about.
Thank you very much, Eric and Imran. This is a perennial topic in foresight meetings. I think we have time for one more question to address to both of you. The question is that both speakers did a wonderful job discussing how foresight's practice in different and diverse public departments and agencies. How is transversality assured between different actors? I mean, the lines through these various examples, and related to that, a question about the whole of government approach and the extent to which this exists. So again, whoever would like to take this first.
So Nancy, I can speak really quickly to sort of the whole of government approach. I think I would love there to be a whole of government approach in the U.S. government. I think it would be very beneficial. I think that working, with an agency like GAO, which handles legislative stuff, and then working with some executive level agencies, we could really do a lot of good. What I'm seeing is I think there's appetite for some of that that's slowly come to fruition, but we haven't achieved critical mass yet. And so what I feel is that the more we can kind of sort of get this into the bloodstream of the different agencies, again, we're pretty massive federal government, obviously, the more that we can get this into the bloodstream and get people thinking about that, sort of shifting their mindset, I think at some point in time, maybe we'll be able to get like an occupational series when it comes to foresight, or a chief foresight officer or something like that. But I think there has to be sort of enough demand for it. And I think that's what we're doing, is we're building that. And I think that will eventually be the catalyst that we eventually get some sort of whole of government council that will actually do this across the government.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. A very good question. In terms of whole of government approach, we are lucky to be the center of foresight within Canada. So we do have a foresight organization within Canada. I think there are things that we can do to enhance that a lot more. Like there are still some foresight organizations, not within different departments and agencies, but not as many, obviously, as we'd like to see, right? Similar to what Eric had mentioned. I think there's also things that we can do across governments, like getting what we'd like to do is try to get a better sense of foresight organizations working at the municipal level and at the provincial level, and build sort of networks and connections to those levels. And also just not to, like, that's all good within a government context, but in terms of transversality, like when we do our foresight research, we always want to be engaging externally, right? External to the public service, to get ideas from experts that are working in different fields in the not-for-profit sector, private sector, citizens, things like that. So in terms of generally speaking, there is two components of that: the whole of government, and that, as well as just external to government, to get as many views as possible as we build our foresight work.
Thank you very much, Imran and Eric. And as I mentioned, there's a really rich set of questions in the chat, which will be addressed. I'm going to turn this back over to Clem for the closing.
Great, thanks. Thanks to our speakers. Wonderful job. There were a variety of issues raised, and as we said, we will feed the questions that didn't get answered to the speakers. They'll answer those, and we'll share those. The results of this, the taping, will be posted along with the slides and those responses. We also welcome input to future sessions. And in particular, one of the questions raised was about state and local and provincial foresight. There's a lot of activity, but it's not well orchestrated or known about. And so if people want to propose sessions, please do. Public Foresight at Gmail is the place where we're collecting ideas. But with that, I'd like to thank all of the attendees for coming. Looking at Wendy Schultz now, and it's wonderful to say hello to many of you, and thank all of you for attending. Thank the speakers and APF for taking part, and say to you all a foresightful 2023. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Yep.